All right, so we're going to spend some time this year talking about learning how to learn. And this first video we'll call The Essence of Learning Better Doing. We'll explain that as we go. So before we start, we like to learn what you think learning is. You've been in school for a while. You are, it's assumed you know what learning is. We don't talk about learning very much. We just jump right into the subject. So what do you actually think learning is? Don't look it up. But what is learning? If you had to define it in a couple sentences, what would you say? So actually pause, take some time, think about it. Don't look it up. Don't talk to anybody else, and write down what you think it is. So our definition of learning, just read it word for word. Learning is purposely building your competence to positively affect the world in some way going forward. Okay, that's a decent definition. We'd love for you to put it in your own words, whatever works for you, but that's the idea. Learning is actually building ability to do. It's not just taking a test, cramming everything into short-term memory, getting what grade you get, maybe needing to remember a little of it on the final exam where you cram it back into short-term memory. You get your grade and you move on. That isn't learning. That is game playing. Learning is actually being able to do something important better after studying than you could have before you studied. And it's also carrying that ability with you into your life. We're going to talk about 3 essential aspects of learning: encoding, storing, and retrieving. Encoding is the one you might not know that word, but it's the one you're most familiar with when you think about learning. It involves how information is presented to students. So when you're sitting there and you're having information presented to you in class by the teacher, whether it's on an overhead or through a discussion or a handout or whatever, that's encoding. That's information going into you. How does it make its first entry into your mind? That's encoding. Then storing, it involves the memory in which the information is stored. Is it sensory memory, short-term memory, working memory, long-term memory? Where does it get put? Is it only in there for a while, or is it in there for a long time? And then retrieving involves the students practicing the summoning of information out of memory into efficacy. So retrieving is calling up what you know so that it comes back to you in a way that you can use in your life. So if you think about it, all 3 essential elements are vital to the process. Encoding is vital because if you don't get the information put in there well originally, then there's only so much you can do to store it or recall it, right? If it's not in there well to begin with, storing it and recalling it well isn't really going to get you knowledge. Storing is vital because if you're only putting it in short-term memory, you're going to forget it, and it's not going to be usable later, and it's not going to be able to be recalled as real knowledge. And retrieving is vital because if you don't refresh it by retrieving and bring it into working memory to put it to use, if you're not familiar with how to do that, even if it's in long-term memory, it's not going to be useful to you because you're not going to know how to bring it into actual use. So let's talk, why are we talking about this at all? Well, I think we're talking about this because it's so easy to go wrong. And how do we go wrong when we go wrong? Well, teachers and students both tend to focus a lot on the first one, right? Encoding. And again, encoding is really important because if it doesn't come in well, then there's only so much you could do, right, to fix it. So encoding is really important, but it's not the only thing, and often it gets treated as if it's the only thing. Also, because students are so concerned with their grade uh, as opposed to learning, and they have so much to do, often they get in the habit of just putting everything in short-term memory. And if it's only in short-term memory, then you can't even recall it when you want to, and it's just there to do well on an assessment. It's not there to actually be used in the world. And also because there's so much pressure to get through all the material that we're asked to teach and you're asked to at least learn in short-term memory, there's not that much recall, right? Other than a final exam, in many disciplines, you learn something and then you move on. So what we're going to do in class is we're going to recall quite a bit more, probably than you're used to, because we want you to actually learn it. So how can we succeed at actually learning, granted these temptations to go off the rails? Well, we're going to try to encode really well. We're going to try to have videos whenever possible, and they're going to be yours to go back to. And so if it doesn't encode right the first time, it can encode right the second time. We're going to try to make everything you need to know really clear. But we're also going to try to get you to be mindful about not just cramming everything in short-term memory and actually putting it in long-term memory as a goal toward learning. We're going to just try to make you really mindful of that. Talk about it a lot in class. I'm going to ask you where you're putting that knowledge. Are you actually putting it in long-term memory? And then we're going to do probably far more recall work and retrieval work than you've ever done before. And by the end of the year, I hope that you appreciate how much you'll actually know. All right, the importance of real learning. As we will discuss in a future unit, real learning is important because it leads to real increases in competence. It tees you up to actually do something in the world, whether that's for the good of yourself or the people you know, or for a company, or for a community, or for a career. But it leads you to be able to do something better, from being a better friend to coding a computer to playing basketball better to whatever it is. So you don't want to just put it in short-term memory, take your test on it, and move past it. We want all of this to actually make you a more potent citizen and person and business person and human being. So takeaways, you should recall our definition of learning, and you should be able to put it in your own words. And if I ask you what learning is, say it. Explain our three essential aspects of learning. Explain why each essential aspect of learning is vital, like why it's important. Explain how our efforts often don't end in learning, unfortunately. Explain how we are going to try to succeed better at learning in this class. And explain briefly why genuine learning is important in our lives.